associate professor of electrical engineering at Purdue University. That's correct, isn't it?
Yep.
And you have a broad range of research interests, one of which is obviously Brazilian horses in Brazil. And today, the topic of your talk will be the history of the Northeastern horse, the first Brazilian breed. So please take the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to make this full screen. Hopefully you can see this. All right. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Brazilian horse from the Northeast, or the Northeastern horse. Very little known outside of Brazil, and we need to change that. So here's the outline of my presentation. I'm going to start with a little bit of motivation to do this work, and then explain briefly what the Northeastern horse is, the current situation, and then we're going to dive deep here on the origins of this horse, a little bit of the history, components, and finally, we're going to present some conclusions. All right, so what are the main motivations here, right? So we all know that it's important to study these native breeds, right? Because of the local culture, improved breeding practices, conservation efforts, insights into human-animal relationships, and understanding the generic diversity of these breeds and how they have adapted to their local environment. Now, one thing I wanted to highlight here is that this horse, the Northeastern horse, there's a strong connection with the local cowboy, which is very unique for that region of Brazil. We're going to explore this a little bit more. But here we have the picture of many cowboys working together, and they have their own culture with their own clothes, leather clothes, and type of hats is very unique too. So studying native domestic animals offers a window into the past, informs practice in the present, and help us prepare for the future. These are all important things to discuss, but the main two motivations of this presentation and this work is to challenge two common beliefs that we have among our breeders. So that the Northeastern horse originated from three well-known breeds, Sorraia, Garrano, and Barb horse. We're going to challenge that with a little bit of historical component here. And also another thing that we're going to challenge is that there is a common sense that the colonizers brought low-quality horses to Brazil during the beginning of 16th century and 17th. All right, so the Northeast horse, right? What is that horse? So obviously we need to take a look at the environment that the horse was formed as a breed, right? And the colonial Brazilian horse, descended from European horses and formed as independent breed, is closely related to the environment where it was formed, as I mentioned before. So here's the Brazilian map, right? And this region here, highlighted in gray, is the Northeast region, right? So it's almost 19% of the entire area of Brazil, and there are 54 million people living in that area. So inside the Northeast area, right, there is an area that's semi-arid, very dry region, so highlighted here in yellow, right? So this entire area would be the Northeast, and the area in yellow would be the area with semi-arid characteristics. So this area is big. We can fit all these countries: Germany, UK, Netherlands, Belgium, Portugal, Denmark, and Switzerland inside of only this yellow area. So the typical vegetation that we have in that semi-arid area is called Caatinga, and it is originated from Tupi-Guarani, one of the indigenous languages, signifying white forest. So it's a landscape abundant with small prickly trees that shed their leaves during the dry period. So here's a typical view of the vegetation that we have there, right? Different pictures. And here a picture during the dry season, and on the left, same picture on the rain, when it is raining, right? Rain season. So again, it is exclusively, the Caatinga, it is an exclusively Brazilian biome. So, and then when the Europeans came to Brazil and they brought the first the first horses, they enter to that region because that region is near the Atlantic Ocean, right? So they brought the first horses. The horses were exposed to that environment and became a breed that has hard hoof, which is very welcome in that region because there is no need for horseshoes. It's an animal that has this extreme resistance for long distance trips. It's disease resistant, and it is an animal that requires low maintenance because it's obviously formed that region, right? And obviously it got used to whatever it's available for them to eat and drink in that area. So what's the current situation of the breed, right? So again, when the European brought the first horses in the beginning of 16th century, so they were exposed to the Caatinga biome, right? So only the strong ones survived throughout centuries. And so we have our breed, right? But then on the 19th century, so we had a bunch of other breeds brought to the same region, right? Especially they're looking for animals with bigger animals and stronger animals, because with that process of that adaptation, the Northeastern horse became smaller than typical horse, I would say. So I believe in Europe we would consider this as a pony, but in Brazil we still say that's a horse. An ideal animal for us would have 145 centimeters of height. So, but anyway, in the 19th century, so we have these other breeds coming in, right? And then the challenges that the Northeastern horse face was there has been significant interbreeding with various other breeds. The breed has been neglected largely due to the absence of enhancement initiatives, and the Northeastern horse has experienced decline in its value. So we got together and we created an association that it's of national office is in the state of Piauí, place it here. And there is, I would like to highlight also the people who work in Bahia, another state of that region that was really the pioneers on this. And our office is on the state of Paraíba, which is located far east of the country. So here's our logo of our association. Different pictures here of our meetings throughout the years. Also, I wanted to highlight here the INSA, which is an institute from the Brazilian government that has helped tremendously. So INSA means National Institute of Semi-Arid Regions, and they have helped us with developing horses, as you can see here, take in that region, and also helping with literature, publishing books. Here you have two examples of them. Again, as I said, we wanted to challenge two common beliefs. The first one is that they brought low quality horses. And then we're going to try to accomplish that looking at what the first-hand testimony said about the Brazilian horse. So here we have a book from 1587, right? So the first Portuguese to go to Brazil, they went there in 1500, right? So here we have a book, a description from Gabriel Soares de Souza, again from 1587. And here's what he said about the Brazilian horse. The mares of Bahia, which again is a state of that region, are beautiful, like the best in Spain, from which beautiful great racers horses are born. So like the best in Spain, right? It's a big statement right there. So here's another book. This one was written in between 1587 and 1601. And it was written in Latin, and then translated to Portuguese in 1925. And here what they say about the horse. The horse breeding is good in this province, and there are many in abundance, and beautiful riders at a great price. Also important statement there. And finally, another book from the 17th century that talk about the history of the feats recently carried out during 8 years in Brazil and other parts under the government of the illustrious John Mauricio, Count of Nassau. So he was the governor of Brazil when the Dutch was there. So here's what they say. Horses of the best blood and the highest price are found, which Angolans buy in large numbers. And probably what Mauricio of Nassau did was the most important historical evidence regarding the prestige and quality of the horse in colonial Brazil, because he took actually the horses when he left Brazil to Netherlands. He took the horses, some of the horses with him. So here we have a picture or a painting of Mauricio of Nassau before before leaving to Brazil. Here's when he came back to Brazil. We cannot say that this is the horse he brought to his own country, but we know that there is documentations that tell us that he was amazed by the horse that he saw in Brazil, and he brought some of them to there. So here's a painting on the left. This is a painting, the first painting of a horse in Brazil, and I think that's the first in all Americas from 1637. So this was in the state of Pernambuco, also in the Northeast. And if you compare this horse here with a horse, one of our Northeast horse that we have today, there is some similarity there. So these two images, they are apart from each other by almost 400 years. So we can look at what they said about the Brazilian horse at that time, right, 16th century, and then compared to what we have available in terms of drawing from Europe, especially Iberian Peninsula, right, from that same time. Obviously, this is far later. So this is a picture. This is probably the first picture of a Northeastern horse in Brazil from 1885. But again, we have all the drawings and paintings, right, in Europe, and at that time there were fascination with realistic expression, art, and literature, and you can draw a comparison between what we had in Brazil, right, and the European horses, and because they said that the horses that we had in Brazil were as good as the ones in Europe. Now, in terms of the historical documents and genetics, so that's the other part of the presentation, that we will be challenging the statement that the Northeastern horse originated from that three breeds, as we mentioned before. Well, first one is the Garrano, the pony from north of Portugal, right? So you all saw from the literature presented before, so these are the three books I mentioned, that the Brazilian horses were or the Northeastern horses, right? So they were high quality ones. So the pony Garrano didn't have that prestige, right? So we believe that there is no written information about Garranos being brought to Brazil. And here's an interesting book. So it's about the civil war in Portugal when Dom Pedro I went to, so this book is from 1836. So when he went to he was in Brazil, he went to Portugal to challenge the kingdom, right, from his brother. And so here's what they wrote about that thing he did in the book. So he says, they say no horses were brought for the use of officers. Dom Pedro rode the Garrano, a gift of the day. So really, Garrano didn't have that prestige, and because it was a really small animal, right? Small horse. So again, we don't believe it on that. And also, the Portuguese equestrian tradition involved Lusitanian horses or Lusitanian type of animals. So everything that was related to the tradition of riding horses in Portugal at that time didn't have much to do with Garrano. And maybe a stronger evidence about what I'm trying to say here is with this picture from the study proposed by Dr. I think she was a leader researching this in this study. So the title is Genetic Diversity and Relationships of Portuguese and Other Horse Breeds Based on Protein and Microsatellite Loci Variation. So here we have the cluster associated with the Garrano, right? And here we don't have the Northeastern horse here in this study, unfortunately, right? But here is the entire area that includes some of the Brazilian breeds, like the Brazilian Criollo, Pantanero, and Campolina, right? And some of the horses from Portugal and Spain. So we have Sorraia here too, but Garrano is really far from the samples tested from the horses in Brazil. So we really don't believe Garrano was part of that initial initial group of animals brought to Brazil. So another thing that we wanted to be challenging, and I'm finishing this, is that so there's a belief that some of the horses were brought directly from Africa to Brazil, right? And we also need to challenge that because there is no evidence from the documents, official documents. So here's a graph that shows that the number of slaves sent to Brazil from 1574 to 1698, right? So there is a peak here towards the end of the 17th century. But so the slaves were brought to Brazil, and then the ships went back to to get more slaves, right? But the kingdom realized that the ships or the boats needs to be bringing horses to Africa to help them face some of the warfare activities that was going on there. So there is no really activity of the horses going from Africa to Brazil. There is a lot of official letters between governors of Angola and Brazil, right? And none of them mention horses going from this way, only requesting horses from that way. So here's a picture that shows more or less how the route worked. So the horse first went from Portugal to Cabo Verde, and then to Africa, then to Brazil, and then from Brazil to Africa, and from Brazil to a little less from Portugal and Holland. As I said, there are a lot of documents and official letters, right, that states the need of horses, and they had preference for the horses from Pernambuco for some reason. So in terms of the Sorraia, we believe that Sorraia actually could be part of the Brazilian Northeastern Horse, because from the genetic studies, they are not far, right? And also it's common to find in Brazilian horses the primitive marks that's common from Sorraia. So I'm gonna conclude today saying that there is substantial evidence indicating that the Europeans introduced some of the finest horses to Brazil, which became the base of the Brazilian Northeastern Horse. Research findings consistently support the notion that horses were not imported directly from the African continent to Brazil. And findings from both genetic studies and historical evidence suggest that the Garrano pony was not part of the genetic makeup of the Brazilian horse breed. And the earliest animals likely introduced to Brazil were the Lusitanian or similar Lusitanian breeds, along with Sorraia horses. And with this, I conclude the presentation. I'd like to thank you again.
Euzeli, thank you very much. I think what I'm going to do now is open the floor to questions. I see Sarah has a question. As we're still waiting for our next presenter to arrive, I have reminded him, and it is very early in the morning where he is, so hopefully it won't be too long. So I think we'll just take a few questions now. Does that sound like a good idea? Sarah, did you have a question now? Does anyone have a question? It's very interesting to see, to have an overview of the latest research, latest most up-to-date research on this question, because as you say, it's very often comments in the past about quality of horses. It's simply not reflecting reality. It's they're very much judgment based, and it depends on who's doing the judging that. Ilka, you have a question? Need to unmute.
Yes, I have a question. You were showing us these images of comparing the to contemporary sort of other depictions of horses. Were these images made in Brazil, or were they made more on the mainland? And did they adhere to artistic conventions of Europe at the time?
Yeah, that was from they were painted in Brazil from a Dutch person. So we are colonized by Portugal, right? But during the 17th century, so the Dutch took part of the northeast of Brazil for 3 decades, less than 4 decades. I think it was about 36 years. And during these years, so Brazil was governed by Mauricio of Nassau, and he brought a lot of artists from Europe. So they did a lot of painting from the not only from the animals, but also vegetation and other things too. And that picture I can bring back. I think that was the first painting of all horses, of any horse in all this one here, all Americas. So it's from 1637. So they comment about the quality, right? I understand what Miriam was mentioned here, but there is as I said, there is a common belief that we got the worst thing that would be possible, and that was that was the basis of our breed, right? And because the breed itself had to go through an adaptation to a challenging environment, right? So the size reduced, right? So you're talking about a horse that's 145 centimeters, right? It's not a huge horse. It's like it's small to medium horse, right? And then they say, no, we didn't have good horse to start with. And I just don't believe that's true looking at the literature, because they're talking about referring to good horses, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it
I know
depends, as
that's
I
a
say, very
perception
much on
thing,
who's
right?
doing the
And
judging, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
There is another question here, yeah, from Sarah Duncan, and I'm very interested in this one because Sarah's question is, would you say that the Garrano was similar to the hobby in England and Ireland? And I'm going to add the Galloway to that because the Galloway is a related breed. And Anastasia is making the comment that 135 centimeters is a decent size for a horse before 1900s. Yeah, pony size was the thing. Definitely. And being a great fan of the little horses myself. And Sarah's question's interesting.
Can you repeat
Possibly
that, please?
gated breeds.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Sarah was asking about whether there might be similarities between the Garrano and the hobby. And if that's the case, then there would be with the Galloway. But of course, not many people know about the Galloway. I'm probably the only nerd in the world. Galloway.
So is it?
Horse.
I don't know if you can see my slide, what I'm showing here, but are these breeds somewhere in this picture here?
The northern clade, basically, along with Shetlands, and I can't see that too clearly. The Galloway is now considered to be extinct, but its genes live on in a number of other horses. Yeah. Now, one of the things that's interesting is we have documentation to show that Galloways were being taken to Suriname, to the plantations there. Obviously not exactly the same thing, but we do know that Dutch shippers were picking up horses in Ireland and Scotland to take to Suriname. But I think what you have here, your genetics seems to suggest a very, very specific group of foundation animals. Would you say that? Yeah.
Yeah. Because if we look back, right? So what do they have in Portugal, right? It was Sorraia, right? Garrano, and the Lusitanian, right? Or the Lusitania type of horse. Obviously, the breed were not well defined as we know today, right? We're talking about 500 years ago. But we have this grouping of horses with well-defined characteristics. So this study was trying to accommodate to that situation and try to come up with an explanation for what formed our horse, or the base of our horse, the foundation of our horse here. We face, so there is some challenges with the lack of documentation, right? And I think the genetics moving forward will be helping us to clarify a lot of things, especially if we add that the Northeastern horse breed in this picture here, for example, because it was not present there.
Right. That's excellent. I think it's probably in terms of gatedness. The Sorraia does have gated representatives within the type, doesn't it? Laterally gated horses. So I think in that sense, there's probably similarities between and the Garrano, I think, as well. Similarities between the hobby and the Galloway, but probably we don't know whether there'd be a direct genetic link or not. I don't think that's ever been examined. And as the hobbies and Galloways are now considered to be extinct, then unless we can find identifiable remains, which I think is not very likely, then we wouldn't be able to judge whether there was a genetic relationship between them. It'd be nice to think it might happen at some point, but
yeah.
I mean, obviously, we know that right across Europe and the Americas, small gated horses were for centuries very popular. While there were horses with specific functions, like for war horses and so forth, the small gated horses were the popular choice for people who wanted to do long distance rides that they needed to do, or to work with cattle and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what percentage would you are we looking at multi-gated horses in the Northeastern Horse? Are they laterally gated and multi-gated instances?
I'd say they're multi-gated, yeah. Most of them, yeah. So this is actually one of the parameters, right, that we use to identify how pure that specific animal is, if they are gated or not. Because if they're gated, if they have that ability, right, and then we classify them as the higher level of pure, more pure than other animal that's not gated. But this is still, it's funny that you mentioned that, because this is still something that's still important and valuable in the local culture in Brazil, because we're still talking about area that's big, right? And obviously today people don't use horses as they used to, right? But still, that's something that's still in that culture, and it's very valuable.
Yes, it's very valuable. I agree. We kind of threw ours out here in Britain centuries ago, and it's, that was one of the biggest mistakes ever. That we lost. We had some very good gated horses in Britain, but lots of people now are simply unaware of that fact. They don't even realise. Thank you, Euzeli. That was
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think David is here. David Remy, our second speaker.